Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the Douglas A-1 Skyraider. This mid-1940s aircraft was actually built to new naval standards that came about towards the end of the Second World War. However, it would never see service during that war and actually started being increasingly developed during the jet age. Due to the fact that this aircraft was specifically designed for ground attack capabilities, its service would go well on into the 1980s. Let's go ahead and look at the history and development of the A-1 Skyraider. For me, the appearance of the Skyraider came first from the movie Flight of the Intruder in 1991. Now, this movie features the appearance of crews of the A-6 Intruder and their stories. However, for me, the scenes when the A-1 Skyraider first appeared is what really got me as a child. But the story of the Skyraider starts with these three aircraft: the Douglas SBD Dauntless, the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, and the Grumman TBF Avenger. While all three of these were excellent aircraft, I absolutely loved them. In 1944, the Navy wanted a new carrier-based, single-seat, long-range, high-performance dive bomber that could actually be an improvement on these three aircraft. And that's where this man, Ed Hindman, comes in. Hindman had been an aircraft designer for Douglas Aircraft and is actually incredibly influential in the development of multiple aircraft, including the SBD Dauntless, the A-20 Havoc, the A-26 Invader, and later on would be part of the development of the A-4 Skyhawk, a favorite of mine, and even oversaw the development of the F-16. The Navy actually did approve his design, and this became known as the XBT-2D1. And this would be the basis for the AD-1 at the time, later known as the A-1 Skyraider. The prototype first flew only 8 months after its design, and as opposed to some of the other aircraft I talked about, it honestly didn't have a lot of development issues as opposed to some other aircraft of its era. Now, there were some interesting things they discovered during development. One, that for every 100 pounds that they could cut off the weight of the aircraft, they could decrease its takeoff run by 8 feet and increase its combat range by 22 miles. Because of this, they started doing everything possible to cut the weight. They got rid of the internal bomb bay. They re-simplified the fuel system to make it easier, changed the dive braking system, went to an older tail design to decrease weight. And all in all, they managed to cut 1,800 pounds off of the aircraft's weight, meaning it could loiter longer, have better performance at low speeds, making it a perfect ground attack aircraft. Now, because the aircraft wasn't approved for production until after World War II, it never saw action in World War II, and instead would be deployed with the United States Navy and Marine Corps during the 1950s. It would be during this time frame that they found one of the greatest disadvantages of the aircraft. When it would be used for a close-in ground support aircraft, while it had the sufficient armament to do this, it was not very well protected, and they actually ended up installing an armor package to protect the pilot. Its most extensive usage during its entire career would come during the 1960s and 70s, when it would be utilized during the Vietnam War. The United States Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force all utilized different variants of the aircraft during this conflict. And while they were being gradually phased out by the Navy, they were being taken over by the United States Air Force for use in the Tactical Air Command for search and rescue. And this is where they would get probably one of their most favorable and most famous roles, where they would be known as the Sandy. They were a helicopter escort during rescue missions. And this is where that scene in Flight of the Intruder that I showed earlier comes from. Now, sadly, this role would make them also vulnerable to attack. Because they weren't an air-to-air combat vehicle, they were a ground attack vehicle, they were vulnerable to fighter aircraft, and they did experience quite a few losses during the war. And after this conflict, they would be phased out of the United States military's inventory. However, they would still serve with groups such as the Republic of Vietnam Air Force, the United Kingdom, Sweden, France, and actually a few others. And it is actually France who would continue to pass them on to allied nations, where the last nation to utilize them, the Gabonese Republic, retired them in 1985. Now, there are actually more than 30 variants of the aircraft, and so I'm not going to go through every one of them. But they were utilized a lot of times for specialized work, such as the AD-1U, which was just basically a radar countermeasure variant, or the AD-2D, which was actually a remote-controlled version designed to collect and gather radioactive material from nuclear tests. Now, one of the biggest variants is going to be known as AD-5, later on known as A-1E, when they redesignated the aircrafts for a unified system. And this is actually the side-by-side version of the aircraft seen here. Now, this version allowed a pilot and co-pilot to sit next to each other. It did eliminate the dive brakes, but many of the aircraft were actually converted to this variation. Some were even upgraded into the EA-1F, which was a 4-seat version of this aircraft. But most variants were kind of one-off, very limited production numbers. If you would like to see one of these aircraft to this day, you can. They are located around the world. France, Sweden, Thailand, United Kingdom, United States, and Vietnam all have aircraft on display. And there's actually even a few that are in working condition and are capable of flying and can be seen at air shows around the world. But there you have it, a look at the A-1 Skyraider, an aircraft that didn't have a really long career with the United States, only about 30 years. But because of its innovativeness towards being a ground attack aircraft, and it proved that there was a need for such an aircraft, later on aircraft could be developed, including the ever-famous A-10 Warthog. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.